Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two terrific poets with us today, Dinah Berland and Chloe Martinez. Dinah Berland, former senior editor at Getty Publications in Los Angeles, is a poet with a background in art. She is the author of two poetry chapbooks, Hotel at the End of the World 2021, from Finishing Line Press in its New Women's Voices series, and Fugue for a New Life 2020, winner of the 2019 Water Sedge Poetry Chapbook Contest. Her book, Hours of Devotion, Fanny Neuda's Book of Prayers for Jewish Women, Schocken Books 2007, is a verse translation from the German of the first full-length Jewish prayer book by a woman for women. Her honors include an individual fellowship in poetry from the California Arts Council and an international prize from the Atlanta Review. Here's a splendid poet, Dinah Berland.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Harry. This is a real honor to be here, and I'm delighted. I am going to read from both of the chapbooks that Harry mentioned, starting with Fugue for a New Life. This is the cover. And then I'll be reading from the second chapbook, Hotel at the End of the World. And finally, I will give you a sample of the Hours of Devotion book that I'll tell you about when we get there. The first poem is titled, The Casting Lesson. Be vigorous, you said. Be gentle. You expected me to quit, throw the rod down on the concrete bank, like the time I threw my violin against the bed, shattered because I couldn't make Mozart sing. I watched you cast on the empty pond till dusk, cigarette dangling from your lips, focused only on the barren water. Be vigorous, you said. Be gentle. I wanted to be a natural for you, like I wanted to be a virtuoso for my father. Draw the bow across the strings so sweetly. Do it right just once, so he wouldn't have to wrench the bow out of my hand. His fingers swift as hummingbird wings. This is how it should be done, he'd say. Be vigorous, you said. Be gentle. I wanted to do it myself. Pull the line up gracefully. Zip the pond in two the way you do. Hear the zing it makes when I do it right. A bird taking off from a telephone wire. The water was dark when I first felt the weightlessness, felt the line lift, and heard you laugh as I, carried away by the music, began casting faster and faster, practicing in double time. An appetite for mountains. On a Santa Ana night too gusty for crickets, the bright bare cloud takes the whole moon in its paw. I have a craving for mountains, could eat them one by one, boulders, chaparral, and all. The sky is ravenous too, crazy with propellers and stars, causing babies to be born before they're due, burglars to polish their crowbars. It must be the barometric pressure, maybe a tropical storm that makes me want to climb to the top of Topanga, watch Manzanita pitch disjointed silhouettes against the cliffs. The arroyos are expecting an earthquake any second. Anything could happen on this full moon in September, even without you. The next one is for all of you movie buffs, with the idea that everything is a movie. Esperanza. As the sky begins to sour, I pick up my pace to make it home before the local boys stake out their corners, I am listening to the blues on headphones, which turns everything into a movie. The establishing shot, filled with people we will never see again. A woman walking fast as she can in spike heels, the electric blue of her dress deeper than the sky. She pulls a laundry cart with one hand and drags a small boy by the arm with the other. A child who glances up at me with the dark eyes of my own son in another life. It's his look of fear I recognize. The big Korean kid, blind in one eye, stands scowling at the entrance to his father's liquor store, while two scrawny teenagers strike up a smoke. Enter Esperanza, backlit on the balcony. The incandescent glow of her open room picking up the clouds' brassy tune. She leans over the wrought iron rail, her ruffled blouse echoing the gaudy geraniums below the parapet. Esperanza does not look down at the pavement, at the beat-up cars lumbering over potholes, at the woman strolling below, still thinking of her son, the one who still hasn't come home. Instead, she stares straight ahead, waiting for the handsome stranger, who is certain to appear any second now, as the camera zooms in and the story we all came here for begins. And then the last sample from this book, The Art of Listening. We live in a riddle inside a conundrum, a maze with passageways beneath a secret staircase leading to the Kama Sutra played backward on obsolete turntables. Our voices are whale songs, emitted in frequencies only we can hear. I try to speak slowly, ever so slowly, since I heard a scientist say, sound is touch at a distance. Sometimes you forget to listen to what I am saying. Sometimes I forget too, as we drift into a reverie of intonation, pools of sunlight collecting sound waves, saving them for later. And now from Hotel at the End of the World. The first poem I'll read is a sestina, and I'm sure many of you know what that is. It's a structure with a lot of repeating words at the ends of lines, that then repeat again in different order. And the title of the poem is Sephirot, and the Sephirot are Hebrew letters in the tree of life, and it's kind of the essence of Kabbalah, which is the Jewish mystical tradition. Sephirot. He was 81 years old when he drew the letters in my tablet. I remember how he moved the pencil slowly as he wrote my name in letters that added up to numbers. The way he learned them in the village near Odessa when he was a boy, before he was my grandpa. I traced the dotted pictures Grandpa made, teapots, black hat, and candelabra letters. Girls, even at 13, were not taught Kabbalah in Odessa. But this is a free country. So he showed me how he moved the aleph, mem, and shin to make a riddle out of numbers. And I knew it was as important as my name. Sarah bat Avram Yaakov was my name. When I was called to the Torah, Grandpa closed his eyes. He was reciting Hebrew numbers, turning them to songs with backward letters, rocking back and forth as he moved. He was so far from Jerusalem, so very far from Odessa. Why did he and Grandma leave their home in Odessa? When I asked him this, I could not name the strange look on his face. Some said they moved because Lake Michigan resembled the Black Sea. Grandpa played cards in the park. Grandma wrote letters and gazed across the water. What number of people? How many boats? They must have numbered in the thousands. Jews who called Odessa home for generations, fleeing the pogroms. Letters clipped to our family tree told the story later, gave a name to the horror, explained why Grandma and Grandpa picked up their infant daughter and moved with one small diamond sewn inside a coat. They moved like leaves on water, swept up in endless numbers of emigres to Ellis Island. This is how it happened. Grandpa heard his wife scream as she ran from the market in Odessa. She had seen the Cossacks grab a pregnant woman and, in the name of the Tsar, cut her open, stuff her abdomen with straw. Some letters have no sound. They moved like air, like fire, like water, with letters that spelled the unspeakable name of God in numbers. Grandpa Isaac, his wife Paula, and their daughter from Odessa. Milk glass. My bathroom mirror is a window with a sash I could throw open if it were not painted shut. Above it hangs a transparent pane high enough to frame the sky. Usually I forget this, as in the evening while putting on my makeup, I am surprised by a streak of orange or zigzag of dark wings headed for the sea. Stepping from the shower, I see nothing but vapor in the mirror. And in the square above, no telling the difference between cloud and condensation. I am nowhere in this picture and everywhere at once. The way the blind woman said she sees, as if her face were pressed against milk glass. This glass of misted silver breaks my face apart, scatters all its light, the way the soul goes when it flies out of the body, or music as it leaves the tip of the conductor's baton to begin its endless journey into space, where no one will ever say, this was the Swan of Tuonela by Sibelius, who died at 92. This was his cliff of cellos rising with vibrato from the orchestra of death, beating at his dark and rain-streaked window. And last one from this book, which is kind of like a movie too, or maybe 3 movies spliced together. El Norte. When border police lift children from their mother's arms, their father's hands, lock them up in cages from El Paso to El Monte, tossing silver sheets across small bodies. Toddlers cry so hard they can hardly catch their breath. Meanwhile, agents shuttle parents onto airplanes like so much cargo, shipping them to jail in Topeka, Chicago, after they had walked for weeks with feet on fire toward El Norte, the land that was supposed to save them. When a deported Guatemalan mother hides her head in her hands, afraid she will never see her only child again, Graciela, age 7, who had just learned to play Mozart on her 3/4-sized violin, I wonder how my grandparents felt as they rushed to escape the Tsar's army, descending by nightfall into the cavernous belly of a ship, tossing for days on unknown waters. How did it feel to step off the boat at Ellis Island? Did Grandpa hoist little Aunt Fanny to his shoulders so she could see the lady holding her lamp high? Did tears arise in Grandma's eyes, her belly big with Aunt Sophia, the one who would become a violinist? When the U.S. Attorney General poses before cameras smirking as he spouts chapter and verse to justify ripping families apart. I think of Thailand, where 12 soccer players, boys who had never learned to swim, huddle together deep inside a cave, accessible only by serpentine tunnels, now flooded. Their coach, a Buddhist monk, teaches them to meditate so they can endure the weight. Meanwhile, divers in wetsuits gear up with scuba tanks and masks. 2 men for each boy, one to cradle a child beneath his body, the other to follow a guide rope through the tunnel. We follow them each morning in the news until 2 by 2, then 4, then 8, all the boys, their coach and guides, are borne by unseen hands into silver sheets of light. Okay, now I'm going to read just one poem. Actually, they're prayers that I've made into verse. This book was originally written in German. I worked with a translator to have it brought into English, and it's Hours of Devotion, Fanny Noida's book of prayers for Jewish women. It's still around. So I'll just tell you a little bit about it. Many years ago, at a time when I really needed a prayer, I discovered a 19th century book of prayers for Jewish women, a little slim volume, in a used bookstore around the corner from my house on Venice Boulevard. And what I learned later was that the book was an English version of the very first full-length Jewish prayer book for women by a woman. Around that time, my son had been estranged from me for more than 11 years as the result of a bitter divorce. And this little volume contained a prayer for a mother whose child was abroad. It spoke to me so much that I was standing there crying in the bookstore. And it gave me the courage to reach out to my son again. And to my great surprise and delight, he came back into my life after all that time. And this was such a miracle that I had to find out more about the book, of course. And my research led me to want to bring it into modern use again. So this verse edition, which is translated, as I said, from the 19th century German, was published by Schocken Books in 2007. And over the past year, I'm happy to say working at UCLA Extension with a wonderful teacher, Ernie Contreras, some of you may know, helped me to complete the first draft of a screenplay that's tentatively titled Folded Pages. And it's based on the true story of 3 resilient women over 3 centuries whose lives were forever changed by one remarkable prayer book. So I will close with Fanny Noida's Prayer for the New Moon, which is a holiday special to Jewish women, but available to all, that celebrates creativity. And the reason I chose this particular prayer is because this month, the new moon happens to be tonight. So if you look at the sky, you won't see the moon. It's got its dark face to us. On the new moon starts with a verse from Psalms. Teach us to number our days, then we shall gain a heart of wisdom. God of life, who regulates the course of time, you have divided it into great and small periods, into years, months, and days. These passages teach us how time rushes by in swift, uninterrupted flight, and with every onward movement carries us nearer to the end of all earthly existence, into eternity. And that fleeting time, once gone, will never reverse its course, despite all our wishes and ardent desires for it to return. Therefore, we must use it as long as we can still call it ours and waste not even the least bit of it, lose no hours by useless deed or practice. For you, O God, will on some future day call us to account for how we spent our lives. We must carry out our works and complete them as time lays them out before us. If we contemplate them too much and hesitate, then the stream of time tugs them past us, and all that remains are empty hindsight and regret. Whatever we begin and undertake, whatever we struggle with and strive for, may they be healing and God-pleasing works, expressing our highest convictions on earth, worthy of beings who were made in the image of God. Therefore, O Heavenly Protector, I pray to you for understanding and wisdom, that I may use my time in ways that are a blessing to me, to my loved ones, and to my fellow human beings. That I may use every hour, every moment of my life in wise action and effort, in valuable work and study, for the ennoblement of my heart, for the preparation and cultivation of my soul for eternity. O compassionate one, who has always guided and shielded me, continue to grant your gracious protection to me and my loved ones. May the coming month be a month of peace and joy for us. Preserve our health and lives. Soften and lighten our grief. Increase our pleasure in life. Bless the works of our hands, and grant us, in the fullness of your grace, all that we may need and all that may be good for us.
That was magnificent, Dinah.
Thank you so much.
You know, it's a prayer, very touching, and sometimes I think a poem is a spontaneous prayer. Your poetry is well observed, poignant, contains joy. I think, you know, you read the poem about your grandpa, grandma, and their daughter, and even though it was very moving, there was also a sense of joy in there, the connectedness between the generations, and your poems are also very transformative. And I haven't seen you for a long time. I remember, gosh, maybe 30 years, 40 years ago, I always loved your poetry then, and you've always been a wonderful poet, and these seem to be much deeper poetry. And so I want to thank you very much. I have a couple of questions to ask you. When did you write your first poem?
Oh, that's a good one. I actually was a photographer, and I studied painting as well. And I had a job at Peace Press in Culver City. You may know that area. Anyway, I started actually a little romance with one of the printers, and I would give him a photograph and then write a few lines under it. And at one point I realized, and he was a poet, and he gave me his manuscript, and that was exciting to me. And then I realized that when I looked at the lines of verse, there was more image in the words than there was in the photograph. And so I had to study poetry. And I was, I think, 40 or 41 years old.
Now, what is it about the poetry form that attracts you to it?
Oh, everything. I mean, it's so free that way. I mean, we can take everything that's in our lives, everything we see, and then bring them together in ways that you could never experience in any other way, and go much deeper into their meaning. And I learn from my own writing what I'm feeling and thinking.
Now, when you began a poem, say you were telling a young woman, you know, how to focus, or what would come into her mind, what would you tell her? In other words, when you sit down to write a poem, what do you write from? Do you have an idea? Do you have a phrase? Do you see something visually? How do you begin a poem?
I start by reading or listening, and then poems just come from everywhere. They can come from a dream. They can come from something that's been said, a memory. It's almost endless where poems can be generated from. I should say, when you mentioned what would I tell a young girl, I don't know if you know this, but I was Amanda Gorman's mentor at Right Girl. And so what I did with her was I introduced her to her own heritage, to African-American women poets.
You did a great job.
Thank you. I didn't know she would become the inaugural poet for Joseph Biden.
But thank you very much, Dinah. It's always a pleasure. I haven't seen you, as I said, for a long time. It's wonderful seeing you once again. And it's wonderful to meet Chloe Martinez. I will introduce her now. Chloe Martinez is a poet and a scholar of South Asian religions. She is the author of the collection 10,000 Selves, the Word Works 2021, and the chapbook Corner Shrine, Backbone Press 2020. Her work has appeared in Poetry, Plowshares, Prairie Schooner, Shenandoah, Beloit Poetry Journal, and elsewhere. She lives in Claremont, California, with her husband and 2 daughters, and teaches at Claremont McKenna College. Here's a superb poet, Chloe Martinez.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Thanks for having me here. And thanks so much to Dinah for that beautiful reading. I love the way those poems make connections across time and space, the beautiful images you build. I'm still thinking about maybe the first or second poem you read. There's something about eating the mountains. I want to go back and read that. That's wonderful. So I'm going to read a couple of poems from 10,000 Selves today. And then maybe after that, I'll read some newer poems from the new manuscript I'm working on. This book came out a little more than 7 months ago. And it is the 10,000 Selves that it refers to are maybe a way of thinking about multiplicity, the way we're always, inhabiting different kinds of identities and selves as we go through even a single day. Some of the poems are about India, and you can kind of see the cover image here. This is an Indian miniature painting, and it is a horse that is made up of different women. So I came across this, and it seemed like it was the perfect image for this book, in which I have a lot of poems that are about gender and motherhood, and also multiplicity, and also some of them are about India, where I've spent a lot of time during my PhD studies and research after that. So I'm going to read just I'm going to start with the first poem in the book, which is also the source of the book's title. And it's about my very first trip to India when I was an undergrad studying abroad. And I was on a study abroad program, and we were housed in this medieval Rajasthani fort, which was also a museum. So this poem's kind of about that, being in that space, but it is also dealing with these questions of what does it mean to be in a place that's not your own? Are you always a tourist? Is there a way to be something more than touristical? How does travel change the way we think about ourselves and our relationship to place? The Mirror Room, Meringar Fort, Jodhpur, Rajasthan. You live in a high fort above a blue city. The rooftops below speckled with laundry. At night, the distant echoes of 100 brass bands, 100 weddings. The blue of the city is not quite robin's egg, not exactly the blue of chicory. Outside the city is a desert. Don't tell it like a story. It will sound too beautiful. You stand on a high parapet in the rustle and coo of pigeons under filigreed eaves. When you step over red velvet ropes leaving the museum behind, you find rooms empty as the moon, floors carpeted in desert silt. In one bed chamber turned cave, you hold your breath. You bow before a rank hill of fat guano. You touch niches for the ghosts of little lamps, and frescoed girls dance with gods across the wall. Plaster dusts your fingertips. Stained glass windows turn your thin skin rainbow. You take a photo of a white hallway. Mughal arches echo, fade into light. Not a story, not an image. It is a map. At the end of the hallway, a balcony, the ground hazily distant. The wide-winged turkey vultures gliding so close, hold tight to the railing. Notice how soft the sandstone carved into curling vines. Notice it is crumbling. Meringar means sun citadel. Shishmal means mirror palace or else hall of mirrors, but it is just a tiny space, dim, claustrophobic with reflections, wild, intimate room. It wants an audience. Here you are, alone with your 10,000 selves. So as I said, a bunch of these poems are also about motherhood. My kids are 6 and 11 right now. They were smaller when I was writing these poems. And many of the poems came out of this struggle to figure out how to sort of make progress through the chaos of life and early motherhood and working full-time at the same time and trying to write poetry, trying to think about who I was as an artist in the midst of all that busyness of life. So here's a poem about that. Mandala of the pile of papers on the dining room table. Star of pain in your neck, turn it side to side. It glows in the dark all the same. Your poster of the Golden Temple keeps falling down over your desk, and the latest baby announcement watches you severely from the top of the pile. Send the gift already, says the baby. So new it hasn't yet learned how to smile. What is the proper order? How to master your materials? Annual reminder, protect yourself from the flu, and a catalog full of things you hate and also want. You try to imagine spending thousands on the Lombok bed. You stare at its hand-carved filigree, imported perhaps from its namesake island in Indonesia. Site of a recent earthquake, death toll 20. Made in China, more likely. The enormous headboard resembles a flower mandala, but, I kid you not, painted white, and no illusory demons wait here for the boho chic sleeper to encounter in dreams or visions. There will be no battle against the senses, no progress from the simple periphery to the inner circle, which contains, in some traditions, the most fearsome opponents. Some dangerously beautiful, others just plain dangerous. The catalog bedroom is light-filled, tidy. A single houseplant hangs from an exposed beam, and a small green bottle of San Pellegrino rests by the bedside. A room you float into, unencumbered by karma, by want, by messy piles of paper. Mandala, a universe map. At its center, enlightenment, which is to say freedom from causing harm. Move through it by touch, by starlight. Demons may appear. Persevere. Don't look them in the eye. One of my kids is a Girl Scout, and I want to read a Girl Scout poem. The Girl Scouts, at least where I live, have been kind of on hiatus during pandemic or haven't been able to do as much. They've recently started up again a little bit. But before pandemic, I tagged along to a lot of Girl Scout activities and wrote poems in the corner. This one's called Not Yet Official Girl Scout Badges. And it's for my daughter, Amina. Forgetting to eat breakfast while reading badge. Lazing in bed on Sunday morning badge. Catching lizards that got inside and releasing them badge. Supermarket dancing badge. Empathy for the dog you hear howling every morning badge. Boredom badge. Patience while your little sister has another fit badge. Badge for intensity of focus. Steadfast refusal to eat foods you don't like badge. Distractibility badge, also called noticing that flower badge. Badge for laughing so hard you fall on the floor. Rolling eyes and returning to look when parents give educational lectures badge. Living in your body badge. Tripping and falling badge. Insisting on your own pronunciation of Mesopotamia badge. Comic book world creation badge. Actual world creation badge. Bedroom door slam badge. Desiring justice badge. Badge of being nervous before the piano recital, badge of doing it anyway. Sharing dad's obsession with a Pan-Asian mega buffet in Ontario badge. Secretive, looking happily in the mirror sometimes badge. Sitting in mom's office after school because she missed extended day signups and instead of complaining, putting all her paper clips into one giant paperclip chain badge. Badge of wonder, badge of rage. Not caring much about badges badge. Born just before a snowstorm badge. Being beloved badge. And since I just read a poem for my daughter, I want to read one for my mom. And this poem came out of a visit to the Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena. The woman in Degas' Woman Ironing leads in. The woman in Degas' Women Ironing leans in, and suddenly it's clear. Not the layers of tulle, not the lightness of dancers on the stage, not even the painter's many shades of small-mindedness, misogynist, anti-Semite, voyeur. No, I see it now. He's painting effort. He's showing the work. Sweat haloed in a close room, dragging a burning hunk of metal around, or else spinning in a cold studio, the arm stretched further to make that long line that means beauty. The leg in extremis, in turnout, the foot permanently bruised. It's not pretty. The white linens don't lie that way naturally. They have to be pummeled, flattened on the table. Beside the sculpted dancer, sculpted racehorse. Beside the woman ironing, gilded frame, unwrinkled museum wall. In the painter, the same terror of failure as in the laundress, the dancer, the horses running for their lives. The painter alone got for his effort immortality. I wish I couldn't see it, his utter success. It's the truth, how they massage the tender arches of their feet. They must soothe themselves. No one else will do it. Why now, when the endless poster reproductions, ubiquitous, faded, invisible? Because I had you, my daughters, grew you in my own body and pushed you out, kept you close as my own limbs. I am at the museum with my mother. In plain sight, our secret muscles, our aching lower backs, our all-seeing eyes. I think I'll read just one more from this book, and then I'm going to read a couple of new things. So this poem sort of came to me out of nowhere on my phone. It's kind of a NorCal poem. Hopefully the SoCal audience will forgive me. My in-laws live in Sacramento. This is a Sacramento poem. 36 text messages, 16 missed calls. 50 strangers are trying to reach me. They all want to know about 7 boxes of laminate that someone, not me, is giving away on Craigslist. The flooring is somewhere in Sacramento. They leave me their contact info. The inquiries range from casual, hey, my name's Jose. Do you still have the boxes? To formal, good evening. I am interested in the flooring. Some of them take a pleading tone. If you still have the flooring, I'll come get it right now, ! One person says, I need flooring desperately. A lady named D writes a warm message signed, thank you very much. Linda writes twice. Ed seems pretty chill. I can take those off your hands. They are in Fair Oaks, Folsom, Citrus Heights. They are ready to come and get all 7 boxes of laminate flooring tomorrow morning, tonight, right now. They've been ready since yesterday, and they don't know why they haven't yet heard back from me. They are friendly, cordial. They have learned my name from my voicemail greeting, so they say, hi, Chloe. Hi, Carly. Hello, Cleo. Hey, Cole. I can hear Cassandra's kids in the background. Everyone's so full of hope. Everyone thanking me in advance. On Craigslist, Sacramento, I find my listing. I ask the person who really is offering all that flooring for free to please correct the phone number so that at least one of these 52 people so far, of whom I've become quite fond, even protective, might be able to have what they wish for, gleaming new floors. May we all catch a little free beauty sometimes. May at least one of our earnest, desperate, hopeful calls be rewarded with bounty, with gifts unearned and earned, with free laminate flooring enough to make one room at least like new. So I want to read just a couple of new poems now. I've been working on a new collection, and it's kind of about artworks, but it's more about museums and what we do when we look at art and what the space of the museum means. Both my parents are visual artists. You can see over my shoulder, there's a painting by my mom. So I grew up going to museums and looking at art and feeling like that was a regular thing to do, part of life, something I had access to. I know not everybody feels that way about museums, so I'm thinking about that too. How are they elite, inaccessible spaces? How are they spaces that we all share? And in the pandemic, I've been able to go to museums. So I've been thinking a lot about what they mean when I can't access them, looking at art online, remembering my favorite museum spots. So this is one of them. Chagall's A Wheat Field on a Summer's Afternoon at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And you can't see this painting anymore because it's not there, but it used to be a giant, giant hanging. It was originally made as a backdrop for an opera. Sometimes you're just too big, too yellow, and you have a mysterious blue boat in you. So someone hangs you on a too small wall between facing stairways that make a sort of narrow passage despite their size. And people on the stairways rise up out of you or else descend into your golden field. They are almost inside you and can't see you whole. You either surround them or show yourself in slivers and glimpses. You become familiar, strange, godlike, always offering and refusing revelation. Due to your proximity to the west entrance with its ticketing windows, security scanners, revolving doors, and information kiosk, not to mention the constant stairway traffic, there is never a proper silence around you except after closing, when there's not enough light to really see your two solar eyes. Then one day, a donor, a renovation. The curators rise in their parallel lifts, black gloved, and gently fold you and take you away. God withdraws at the end of each incarnation anyway. That's a Philadelphia museum poem. Let me read an LA museum poem. LA has so many great museums. This is about the Getty, the center, not the villa. The thing about the Getty is, and this poem is about, well, it deals with a particular image, a mummy portrait of a youth from Egypt, artist unknown, dates something like 150 to 200 CE. The thing about the Getty is it's basically a Greek island with freeways around it instead of the sea. Once you ferry yourself, insert Charon reference, and the out-of-town visitor you were hoping to thrill through it all, you go underground, insert Hades reference, and park. You shuffle along a line, winding as customs and immigration. You feel a bit bedraggled by then, and everyone else is LA chic, but you lift your chin as if you don't care. You rise on the tram, and when you emerge up top, it's okay, because light is bouncing off of every gorgeous stone surface. The weather is changing 6 times an hour, and you spend too much on coffee and drink it looking out at the other world of gardens while your guest takes a phone call or tries to. Reception at the Getty sucks, which is fine. No one can bother you here. You wander off to find the Fayum portraits because when the dead look back at you from their boards, you feel that the end is maybe not to be feared. They seem to keep you company. They are as modern as you are, maybe more so, their curls perfect and those huge, serious eyes of theirs glistening. You say a silent prayer of thanks for these ancient people and the anonymous painters and the dry climate of Egypt to preserve them for centuries. It's begun to rain at the Getty, Zeus probably, and you remember a man you dated for a while, who you felt kindly towards but did not love. You knew that. How he took you out on an ochre-sailed boat, how you worried about him, his smoking, his drinking, his wild fragility, how you broke up a few months later on an international call and never spoke again, not in anger, but because it had all been an error in judgment. You were two people, neither of whom had resources to help the other. It is wrong that these paintings were taken from graves. Also wrong that they lay buried in darkness once, and that this one here, a child, looks just a moment away from wriggling and asking, plaintive, bored, how much longer? And tugging in annoyance at his bright white tunic and a bit of gold on a cord at his throat, which the label tells you probably held a scroll of papyrus, some amulet, some prayer of protection curled inside. Wrong that it did not work. The rain has stopped. Insert sunshine. Cheer up. Be Demeter when her daughter comes home each spring. The thing about the Getty is, it's an island. Nudge your guest down the hill. Find the car. Leave before the traffic catches you. You can't stay here. Thank you. I'll read just one more short one. And thank you again so much for having me. Thanks to everybody who's listening, wherever you are, if you're listening. It's wonderful that anybody's taking time for poetry in the midst of so many things asking for our attention. So this last poem is about the Ghent altarpiece, a really beautiful, big collection of 15th century paintings that I've never seen, but I've been looking at in detail online. There's a really great website called Closer to Van Eyck where you can zoom in on every detail. So that's another pandemic thing that I was doing, zooming in and looking around at this big painting in Ghent. Having never visited the Ghent altarpiece. Having never visited the Ghent altarpiece, I wouldn't know. But when I imagine being there in the room with the real thing, its many glowing painted sections are nearly weightless. And they float, silent, barely held together by their frames. And in the darkness in my head, they fold slightly, hinged wings that make me want to go in them, walk the green field, be among the crowd of devotees, which I am not Christian, not Flemish, not a man. And should I someday go to Ghent, that cathedral will fail me somehow, some crucial information, which is to say light, withheld. Still, I'd like to test this theory face to face that the special beauty of Adam stepping one's senses with shame ahead is mine. And mine, the quietly joyful angels all swinging their censers. Stolen 7 times, returned to me. In the dim, vast space, I'd call to them, oh, my containers, my parents, my beloved. Oh, Eve of the strong gaze, the rounded belly, all-knowing. Hello, my contemporary. Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe. Your poetry just has such wonder, vitality, richness of life, and you have such great narrative strength. You know, you had used that one poem where you use the word badge a lot. You know, I would say your poetry is a badge of wonder. It's transfixing and loving, and you just have so much vitality, and you let us into your world and all the worlds that you have visited within the poetry that you read us. And I would just like to ask you, I noticed in your bio that you are a scholar of South Asian religions. How did you get interested in that? That would be interesting to me.
Yes. Very randomly in college as a sophomore, I took an introduction to Hinduism class. I didn't know anything about India or Hinduism or South Asia. I thought I should know about this. And I took a class, and in the class, we read poetry by a medieval woman Hindu saint named Mirabai. And I was totally fascinated, in part because I'd never read poetry by a woman that was so old and that was also like still important to people now. It felt like I was reaching back to this woman's voice from the past that was new to me and was so exciting. And I really got into studying South Asia because I wanted enough context to read her properly. And I went down the rabbit hole. I started taking Hindi and Sanskrit. I went to India on study abroad, and then I went for a PhD. It was very unexpected to me. And I'm still studying and teaching about India now, 20 some years later.
I got my BA in English at Northridge, and my teacher was Anne Stanford, and she translated the Bhagavad Gita, and she taught herself Sanskrit in order to translate it. And she said it was the original copy was very strict. Hers was very strict. And 2 lines I always love in that book are, I am not stained by my actions. I do not yearn for their fruits. And I think about that a lot, especially in our time and here in America, where we all want rewards for everything we do. We give so many rewards to people. When did you write your first poem?
I can't remember when I wrote my first poem. I remember when I started reading poetry. I mean, maybe as a little kid, but when I was in 4th grade, I had a teacher who made us memorize a poem and recite it. And that's like a big early poem memory for me, having to learn poems and thinking about what it meant to have that language as kind of my own. When you memorize something, you really claim it, right? And you have it there with you. You carry it around. You can pull it up when you're bored or when you can't go to sleep, and you can go through that poem again. It's different every time. So I don't know when I started writing, but I know that I think I started maybe being a poet when I started to internalize poems that way.
And what is it? I mean, you're being a scholar. What is it about poetry that attracts you?
I think actually some of the things I'm interested in religion, because my PhD is actually in religious studies. I'm interested in things related to what we can express with everyday language. And I think poetry lets us do that, right? The things that we experience all the time and maybe we don't put into words, or we don't have language for them, or our language captures them inadequately. I always think about the ways that religious experiences or worlds of religious practice are about that as well. And that's what I think for me, poetry does. It's the French symbolist poet Paul Valéry said, poetry is a language within a language. So it's this way of using the same everyday words that we use, but being able to do a whole nother level of thought, experience, and communication with them.
And when you sit down to write a poem, for example, the poem that you wrote about I think it was your mom, you wrote a poem about your mom. What do you focus on when you first start writing? Do words come to you, or an image? Do you have an idea?
I think I usually start by just trying to engage with something I'm interested in, or some piece of language that gets hooked in my brain, and I need to write it, and I write from there. So that poem started with my looking at a painting and being interested in what that painting was about, and then how it made me think about all of my kind of past experiences looking at artworks about women, art of Degas that we all look at so much, and it becomes sort of like these artworks that are so popular, we almost don't pay attention to them. I was looking at this painting, which was of these women ironing, and it suddenly made me think about the ways that women do work, the ways that women's labor and women's experience is sometimes made a little bit invisible. And I was there with my mom that day. So I suddenly made the connection back to myself as a mother and myself as a daughter. So I would say the way I write poems is very free associative. I start with something and then I keep going.
You certainly live a full life with your family and the work that you do. Dinah, what would you like to say? You recommended Chloe to me to call her or contact her. I'm glad I did. What would you like to say to her about her poetry?
Chloe, I just find your work so inventive and unexpected. It just draws me in. I love your use of language and the way you tell stories, and then how the stories kind of morph into something else. I just love your work. It's very refreshing.
Thank you so much. Thanks both so much.
I like the painting behind you, the one that there's an archway and then you go through it, and it looks like a temple behind that. What is that one right there?
That one here, I'm leaning the wrong way. That's actually just a blown up photograph, but it kind of looks a little painterly from here. It's a photograph I took of the Golden Temple in Amritsar, which is the kind of most holy place for the Sikh religion. And that's looking into the central. You can kind of see there, the central part of the temple is gold covered, and it's surrounded by a lake. And you go in through these gates and people walk around the lake. It's a really beautiful, meditative, peaceful space.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in New Bedford, Massachusetts, a fishing town. We always say in the armpit of Cape Cod. Originally in the 19th century, a whaling town, and then industrial, and nowadays fishing town, beach town.
How about you, Dinah? Where did you grow up?
Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Milwaukee.
Yeah. And then I came out here. My first marriage was to a doctor during the Vietnam War, and they could send them wherever. And so we could pick a place to go when he became a specialist. And so we decided, we'd been to Mexico and loved Mexico. So we decided we wanted to go to the Long Beach Naval Base in California. That's how I got here, with the Navy.
And where do you live these days, Dinah?
In Mar Vista.
In where?
Yeah. Mar Vista. It's next to Venice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has really been a wonderful reading. You both are just really amazing poets, and you just bring so much life and knowledge to the poetry that you do. And it just, poetry is very exalting to me, and you two have really lifted me up today, and I'm just so grateful for your poetry. Here's our wonderful director, Jennifer Clymer. What would you like to say, Jennifer?
I was, without getting political, it's been a rough week, and to have this celebration of language that's so female driven, not to take anything away from the masculine voice, but right now I'm kind of craving strong female voices, and this was the perfect timing for it. So thank you both. It grounded in universal truths.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Chloe, and thank you, Dinah. You really touched me deeply, and this is a memorable poetry reading. And Jennifer is the one, and the Creative Chaos MPTF crew who put this together, and many other shows. 3 or 4 days, 3 days a week now. It used to be 4, so I'm always grateful to them too. So thank you both, and here's Jennifer to take us home. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. And hopefully we see you guys back here again soon.
So
Thank you so much.
So much.